Hello. Okay, I'm going to talk to you a bit about the Crusades. Some of you have already done some work on this. Some of you have already done some lessons on this. Those of you that have had the chance to watch the Horrible Histories, King John, Magna Carta, you would have seen the information about the Crusades on that, although it's a bit of a light-hearted approach. If you haven't, I suggest you watch it because it combines some of the things we've been talking about in class, which are the problems facing medieval kings, the Magna Carta and the Crusades. And famously, Richard the Lionheart is this kind of like incredible king that goes off and fights in the Crusades while his nasty brother King John stays behind in England, and that's kind of represented in Robin Hood. And as we've looked at in class, because it was the monks that did the writing, and the monks would have been supporting the Crusades, and the monks weren't such a big fan of King John, that's why we have history portraying those kings very differently. Okay, so first of all, let's have a look at what were the Crusades. So to think about what would make you go and fight a war in a completely different country, thousands of miles away, at a time when they didn't have planes, and the time when it would have taken weeks and weeks, sometimes months to travel a long distance, what would have made you go and fight in a war that was for someone else and a very, very long way away? Okay, so have a little think about the things that would have made you do that. What would encourage you? What would encourage you now to do that? You might find it very difficult to think what reasons you would do that. Maybe money, maybe the promise of something better at the other end of things, maybe the hope of a better life if you did fight in that war. Maybe you just really like fighting. Maybe your life where you are is quite boring and dull. Or maybe you're told by somebody who you really respect that that's something you should go and do. Okay, so have a think about that for a minute. You can pause at any point in any of these slides and answer the questions yourself on paper, or you can just think about them in your brain. Okay, so what I'm going to do is to talk to you a bit about what the Crusades were. Now, I'm not going to take full credit of the things I'm talking about today. The PowerPoint, I can thank Mr. Chapman, thank Mr. George, and I can also thank the BBC bite-sized site who's got lots of information on the Crusades. All right, so the time period we're looking at are the Middle Ages. Okay, and if you can see from our image here, okay, it's a medieval. Remember, medieval and Middle Ages are the same thing. We're generally, when we learn about it in secondary school, looking from the time the Norman Conquest 1066 up to the Tudor period, okay, which is really around about 1500. So we can see here, these are knights, and we've got holy people here. We can tell by what they're wearing on their heads that they are holy people. We can tell what these guys are wearing on their heads that they are knights. Okay, at the moment, if we're looking at this source, we might not be able to find out what the Crusades are, but we can tell that there's something to do with religion, and also we can see the cross on the horses here. All right, we can also see some kind of weaponry here. So in the Middle Ages, the Muslim world stretched from India to Spain, and that included Jerusalem and what we know as the Holy Land. Now, I mentioned that this area, which around Jerusalem, which is nowadays what we would call Israel, in the past it's been called Palestine, was holy land for Christians and Muslims and Jews. For Christians, Jerusalem was the place where Jesus died and was buried. And to Muslims, Jerusalem is the third most holy city, as Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven from there. And all of the Jewish history is centered in a particular area in Jerusalem, in which is very, very, very holy even today for Jews. And there's an area there called the Wailing Wall, which is still very special to Jews, still a holy site. So already we can see why there would be some sort of conflict there. So Arab Muslims conquered the Holy Land in 638. Okay, so this is pre-1066, as you know. So it became harder for Christian pilgrims to visit as various Muslims groups started to struggle for power in the area. In 1095, Pope Urban II promised the Knights of Europe forgiveness for their sins if they went on a crusade to win back Jerusalem for Christianity. And many responded by taking up the cross, which means they went there for religious reasons. And they showed this act by cutting out red crosses and sewed them into their tunics. And I'll show you a picture of that on the BBC site in just a minute. The First Crusade began in 1096, and Christians known as the Franks from France, Germany and Italy set out on a long journey to the Holy Land led by nobles and knights. Around 10,000 people gathered at Constantinople, which was the capital of Turkey, before taking control of the Holy Land. So let me just move you on to our next image. Now, it wouldn't have been, I love this picture. It wouldn't have been that easy for people just to get across to the Holy Land. Like I said, nowadays, you could just get there on a plane in a matter of hours. So it just kind of shows these people going across water here, all squished together in a boat with their weapons, etc. It wouldn't have been quite as simple as that. But they would have been, a lot of their journey would have been overland, and some of their journey would have been by. After a long siege, the First Crusade, Jerusalem was captured by the Europeans. It was a very brutal attack, and the Muslims were defeated. And the quote that is on the BBC site is, "The slaughter was so great that our men waded in blood up to their ankles." But any kind of view that conflict between Christianity and Islam is a new thing, you can realise actually it's been going on for a very long time, 1,000 years. Right, so here's your first activity. And I want you to pause on this page. I'll just move my face out of the way. Wherever I move, I'm in the way, aren't I? Can I pop myself just there? There, okay. All right, so I need to pause on this page and add the words in. Okay, so here we have a written down quotation from the Pope at the time, an original source, okay, which is very helpful to us in history. "Brothers, I speak as a messenger from God. Your fellow Christians in the East desperately need help. The Saracens," this is the Muslim army, "have attacked them and have pushed them deep into the Christian land. They are killing great numbers of Christians. They are destroying churches and land. In the name of God, I beg you all to drive out these foul creatures. Your own land has too many people. There is not much wealth there. The soil hardly grows enough to support you. Set out for Jerusalem. Take that land from the wicked infidel and make it your own. If you die on the journey, or if you're killed in a battle against these Saracens, all of your sins will be forgiven at once. God himself has given me the power to tell you this. Some of you have spent too much time fighting against your own fellow Christians, but now you must fight the Saracens. Let bandits become soldiers. Soldiers who have been fighting for money must now fight for heavenly riches." Now, the question we are asking is, why did people go on crusades? Just have a look at this source we've got here. I reckon you could find 3 or 4 reasons why people would go on crusades just looking at this source. And what we're going to do, so you can do this activity. Let me put it on the page so you can actually see it. Okay, you can pause on that page, have a read and do that activity. And you can pause on this page and just do this by writing out the table and including the correct statement in the. Okay, so here we have a map of some of the crusades that took place over hundreds of years, and you can see they're all heading towards the same place, all right, but they're coming from all over. And the First Crusade, Second Crusade, drives me mad when that comes up. Let's get rid of it. Third Crusade, Fourth Crusade, Children's Crusade, which is something we'll look at next lesson. Fifth, Sixth and Seventh Crusades all failed. I'm going to show you. So, using the card sort and information from today's lesson, you must answer this question in your books. Okay, why did some people go on crusades? And these are the different levels you can work towards. Okay. Here's an extension activity. Would you have been a crusader? So feel free to pause on this page and use this. And now I'm going to show you a little clip. Sorry if a lot of noise goes on in the background. Lots on this on BBC. Let's watch it together. Put my face in front of that other lady's face.
In the Middle Ages, the Islamic world stretched from India to Spain. It was scientifically and culturally ahead of the Christian countries of Western Europe. By 1070, more and more Turkish nomads were settling in the Christian Byzantine Empire, and the Byzantines felt threatened by this. Then from 1087, Turks stopped Christian pilgrims from entering Jerusalem. In 1095, the Pope hatched a plan promising the Knights of Europe forgiveness from sin if they went on a crusade to conquer Jerusalem.
That's a Pope guarantee.
In 1099, an army of knights and nobles managed to capture Jerusalem. It was brutal. They said they killed the Muslims until the streets ran with blood. Over the next 3 centuries, there were many more crusades, with soldiers ranging from kings to peasants. Some didn't go as well as others. In fact, most were complete disasters. They eventually lost Jerusalem and were often defeated. On one occasion, England's king was kidnapped on his way home after failing to reconquer Jerusalem. That's pretty humiliating. Crusades weren't always against the Islamic world. Oh no, there were also crusades against non-Catholic Christians. Oh, and people the Pope saw as heretics. It would seem everyone had their own reasons for crusading. Some went to make up for sins, some were just after a bit of adventure and to see the world, and some just wanted to steal and kill. They were massively unsuccessful, to be honest. The Crusaders failed to keep any conquered land, but they discovered lots of new things like gunpowder, better number systems, and medicine. For instance, Louis IX founded the first hospital in Paris on returning from a crusade. So even though many died and in the end all the conquered land was lost, one eye-opener for the Crusaders was the world was much bigger and more developed than they'd ever realised.
Okay, so now you've watched that video, that should be able to help you with your question and your answer. Now what you can do is you can write it out and email it to your teacher, or you can write it out on paper, take a photo of it and send that to your teacher. However you want to do it, you can email your teacher and tell them what you've learned about the Crusades from this lesson. But ideally, if you can then just go back and answer the question that I left you here. Okay, which was using the religion, money and power. Answer your questions. Why did some people go on a crusade? Okay. Feel free to do any more research you would like to do on this topic, and again to watch the Magna Carta episode in Horrible Histories.